By the time this all started, my life was about as simple and satisfying as a man could ask for. Clear blue sky over the subdivision, the smell of cut grass in the air, and the sound of a V-twin engine idling smooth and low in my driveway while I stood in my usual red and black checkered flannel shirt, coffee in one hand, socket wrench in the other, admiring the work I'd already done on my garage and the work I was planning next. I'd bought this house for two reasons: the oversized two-car garage and the quiet street where a man could roll a bike out, tune it in the sunshine, and talk horsepower with his neighbors without anyone complaining. Over the last year, I'd turned that boxy, gray, lifeless garage into something worth walking into, a real bike space, not some cluttered storage unit. Fresh epoxy floor in a deep graphite color that made dropped bolts easy to spot, custom steel workbench welded by my buddy from the plant, pegboards perfectly lined with wrenches, torque keys, impact sockets. But the big plan, my big project, was finally underway, converting the back half of the garage into a full-on motorcycle bay, with a lift table, wall-mounted tire rack, new electrical for better lighting, and a set of glass-paneled side doors that would let the daylight pour in. I had the city permits framed in my office, the contractor scheduled to run wiring later in the week, and blue tape still marking the outline on the garage floor where the lift would bolt down. Every morning I stepped into that garage and could already see it finished in my head: three bikes lined side by side, tools exactly where I wanted them, radio playing low while the sun hit the polished tanks just right. For a while, the only voices I heard about the project were good ones: Mike from next door leaning on the fence telling me I was living the dream, Greg from two houses down asking if I'd help him resurrect an old dirt bike he'd had since high school, even the mailman slowing down to say, "Man, this is coming together nice." Guys got it, they understood. It was quiet, it was clean, and it was mine. I was finishing my second cup of coffee, looking at the new overhead lead strips I'd just installed, when the sound of fast, angry footsteps on concrete cut through the easy morning like a bad engine knock. I didn't need to look up to know what that rhythm meant. I'd heard it enough times to recognize it. I set my mug down and turned toward the driveway just as the HOA president came striding up, clipboard in one hand, the other already raised in accusation like he was about to stop. He didn't say hello, he didn't ask how I was doing, he didn't even glance at the sky or the bike or anything that resembled normal human life. Instead, he stared straight into my open garage with the intensity of a man looking for a crime scene and barked, "You are in serious violation of Homeowner Association Structural Codes." His voice boomed down the street loud enough that Mike popped his head out of his own garage, rag still in his hand. I wiped my palms on my jeans. "Morning," I said evenly. "You want to back that up with something written, or are we just yelling phrases now?" He marched closer, stopping at the threshold of my garage like there was an invisible line he didn't dare cross without making it official. He lifted his clipboard, shuffled a few papers with theatrical urgency, and stabbed his finger at the blue tape marks on my floor. "Illegal renovation," he snapped. "Unapproved garage alteration. You are converting this area into an unauthorized commercial facility." I looked from the tape to him and back again. "That's painter's tape," I said, "for measurements, and this is my garage. This," he said, sweeping his clipboard at the workbench, wall racks, and tool chests, "is clearly intended for commercial motorcycle activity." Mike wandered a little closer down his driveway, coffee in hand. "You can tell all that from tape," he called. The president snapped, "This does not involve you, Michael." "You're yelling in the whole street," Mike replied. "Feels like it involves everybody." I ignored that and kept my eyes on the man with the clipboard. "I pulled permits," I said. "City zoning signed off last month. I'm upgrading electrical, installing better lighting, and putting in a lift so I don't wreck my back crawling on the floor, that's all." He glared at me like I'd confessed to building a casino. "The city has no authority over homeowner association standards. Your permits are meaningless here." I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because the arrogance was so obvious I couldn't hold it in. "The city absolutely has authority," I said, "over everything that actually matters: wiring, walls, support beams. You don't outrank the building department." He puffed himself up with righteous indignation. "The homeowner association has final say on all exterior and structural modifications that affect community cohesion and property values." "This is a garage interior," I said slowly. "You can't even see it from the street unless I open the door." "I can see it right now," he shot back as if that proved everything. Greg's truck rolled past at that exact moment and he slowed when he saw the standoff. "Again?" he called out his window. "What's illegal today?" "Apparently tape," Mike answered, "and existing in a garage." The president snapped, "You too will refrain from commentary. WHILE official business is being conducted." I crossed my arms, the flannel pulling across my shoulders. "What rule exactly am I breaking?" He flipped through his pages like a magician searching for the right card. "Homeowner Association Structural Code Section 12B. GARAGS are to be used for vehicle storage and standard household items only. No conversion to workshops, commercial facilities, or specialized activity zones is permitted." I blinked. "That's not what it said when I moved in." "It was updated," he said triumphantly, "last week." "Last week," I repeated. "Convenient. You do that before or after you saw me wheeling in the lift catalog?" Mike muttered. "He was literally staring at the flyer in your mailbox." The president jabbed his clipboard toward my tool cabinets. This garage is no longer a standard vehicle storage area. It is a motorcycle renovation facility. It's where I work on my bikes, I said. My bikes, my tools, my house, that's still allowed in this country last I checked. Not under the Homeowner Association's guidance, he snapped. You are creating a mechanical nuisance zone. Greg parked at the curb and climbed out of his truck. What's a nuisance zone? He asked. Sounds like a paintball park. It is a threat to community peace, the president thundered. ENGINES, oil, noise, unsanctioned projects, and now structural modifications to the garage space. I shrugged. I work during the day, I wrench on weekends. I don't rev the bikes at midnight, I don't run open pipes at dawn, and I keep everything clean. You've never gotten a single complaint about my place. Neighbors have expressed concerns privately, he said. Mike raised his hand. No, we haven't, Greg added. I literally asked him if he'd help with my bike. The president ignored them. You have 48 hours to submit a reversal plan. A what? I asked. A written commitment to remove all non-standard garage equipment, restore this room to a basic storage area, and cancel any planned modifications. He thrust a folded notice at me. Failure to comply will result in daily fines and a formal hearing. I didn't take the paper. You realize you're trying to tell me what I can do inside my own garage with permits during the day. I realize you are openly challenging the Homeowner Association, he said, and that we cannot allow. I stepped closer just enough that he had to tilt his head back a fraction. I'm not challenging anything, I said quietly. I'm living within the law. If you want to pretend your clipboard outranks city code, that's your business, but my renovation is staying. His voice jumped an octave. You do not decide that, the board decides that. Then the board can read my permits, I said. They can also read the letter I'll send if you try to fine me for obeying the law, the president sneered. And who do you think will take your side? Some city clerk, some paper pusher, no one cares about your little garage. I let the slightest smile tug at the corner of my mouth. I wouldn't be so sure, I said. You're not the only one who reads rules for a living, he frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing you need to worry about, I answered. Yet, Mike cleared his throat. He means the sheriff, he said casually. They play cards on Thursdays. The president's head snapped toward him. The sheriff, his eyes shifted back to me, searching my face for some sign that this was a bluff. I said nothing, just held his gaze. He swallowed once, then forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. The law has no interest in garage violations, he said, but there was a crack in his voice now, a tiny fracture in the armor. You will find that the Homeowner Association is far more persistent than any county officer. I finally took the notice from his hand, glanced at the overblown wording, the threats, the deadlines. We'll see, I said. You want to fight over a man's garage, you're going to get one, just not the kind you're expecting. The sun climbed a little higher, light pouring into the garage, glinting off chrome and polished tools while the president turned on his heel and stormed back down the driveway, muttering about hearings and violations. Completely unaware that he'd just picked a battle with a man who not only knew engines and wiring and permits, but also had a friend whose badge carried more weight than any rulebook he could ever print. By the next morning, the sun was already pouring bright gold across the driveway when I stepped out in my checkered flannel shirt, half expecting the HOA president to be lurking behind a bush with his clipboard like some suburban scarecrow. But even I wasn't prepared for the army of men he'd assembled at the end of my driveway. 3 volunteers in matching HOA vests. One guy I'd never seen before holding a tape measure like it was tactical gear, another clutching a camera, and the president himself pacing aggressively in front of them as if he were about to brief a SWAT team on a hostage situation instead of a garage renovation. The moment he saw me, he jabbed his clipboard into the air like a conductor starting an angry orchestra and shouted, "You are hereby under active HOA investigation." Loud enough that 2 men walking their dogs down the street stopped mid-step, the dogs staring up at him in confusion. I sipped my coffee and stared back at the spectacle. What exactly is being investigated? I asked. Structural deviance, he bellowed. Community disruption, illegal garage modification. He spun toward the volunteer with the tape measure. Begin voltage assessment, the man blinked. Oh, with a tape measure, the president wheeled on him. That is what you brought, use it. The volunteer shrugged helplessly and began measuring thin air near my garage door as if hoping the correct voltage would reveal itself to him. Mike stepped out of his garage across the street, wiping grease off his hands from whatever engine he was working on. Morning, he called. What's the circus? HOA investigation, I replied. Apparently my garage is a threat to national security. Inaccurate, the president snapped. It is a threat to community cohesion. Greg walked up the sidewalk holding a breakfast burrito. What's cohesion? He asked. Mike shrugged. Whatever Mark shouts after sunrise. The president ignored them and turned on me with renewed self-importance. Per MY notice, you have failed to submit a reversal plan. As such, we are escalating this to full enforcement protocol. I crossed my arms. You gave me 48 hours. It's been 24. We operate on HOA time, he snapped. Not civilian time. Civilian time. Greg muttered, is he running a military base now? The president snapped his fingers at the man holding the camera. Photograph everything. Document every angle. I want this entire criminal workshop cataloged. The man reluctantly began taking photos of my driveway, my mailbox, a crack in the sidewalk that wasn't even on my property, and then inexplicably a tree. Not that, the president barked. The garage, focus on the garage. We must prove his intent to create a mechanical facility. I stepped forward. There is no intention to create a commercial facility. I work on my own bikes, that's it. Your intent is irrelevant, he snapped. Only the HOAS perception matters. Mike whispered, we should embroider that on a pillow. Greg nodded. Sell it at the clubhouse. The president jabbed a finger toward the lift table sitting unassembled against the wall. That device represents a major violation of structural purpose. GARAGES are for cars, not motorcycle operations. You know motorcycles are vehicles, right? I asked. He stiffened. Not commercial ONES. None of them are commercial. You cannot prove that. They're mine. Possession does not determine intent. Mike nearly spit out his coffee, laughing. Then what does? The HOA decides intent, he thundered. And we have determined this to be an unauthorized renovation facility. A black sedan pulled up near the curb and another HOA board member stepped out, a tall, tired-looking man with the defeated posture of someone who had been dragged into this unwillingly. The president marched to him. You're late, he barked. The man sighed. I was working. The HOA comes first, the president snapped. Remember the oath. Greg raised an eyebrow. You guys have an oath. The board member rubbed his forehead. We do not. The president ignored him entirely. We are issuing a stop work order. I folded my arms. You can issue whatever you want. The city already approved my renovation. The city is irrelevant. I pulled out my phone. You want to tell that to the sheriff? For the first time, a flicker of panic rippled across his face. The sheriff has no jurisdiction in HOA matters. He does in matters of harassment and illegal enforcement attempts, I replied. The board member cleared his throat nervously. Mark, maybe we should slow down here. If he has permits, the president whirled on him. Permits are meaningless. He is not obeying the HOA. But he hasn't broken any. Silence, the president shrieked so loudly a crow flew off a nearby roof in alarm. We will now move to phase 2, Mike muttered. How many phases does he have? The president snapped his fingers again. The volunteer with the tape measure stepped forward. Declare the structure non-compliant. Non-compliant with what? I asked. The HOA standardized garage template. There's a template, Greg asked. There is now, the president proclaimed. You have until tomorrow to remove all modified features. I'm not removing anything, I said. You don't make the law. I make the rules, he corrected. The HOA enforces THEM, and you will not be allowed to continue this construction. We will issue daily fines, severe fines, hefty fines, crushing fines. How much? Mike asked. The president froze. I have not finalized the number, but it will be significant. So you don't know? Mike said. I know it will be enforced, the president insisted. And you, he jabbed a finger toward me, will face a formal violation hearing tomorrow at noon. I won't be attending, I said. I'll be working in my garage. You cannot ignore a hearing. Watch me. He puffed up like a balloon about to burst. Then we will hold the hearing in your absence and find you guilty. Of what? Garage misconduct. That's not a thing. It is now. He spun to his volunteers. Pack UP the evidence. We have work to do. They collected their random assortment of photos, tape measure readings that measured nothing, and notes scribbled on the backs of grocery receipts. As they marched away, the president turned back for one final melodramatic declaration. BY tomorrow, you will regret defying the association. We will show you that no one, not even someone with friends in law enforcement, can escape the consequences of garage rebellion. I sipped my coffee. We'll see. Yes, he hissed. We will. Then he stormed off with his crew, still shouting orders, still waving his clipboard, completely unaware that while he was preparing his little HOA courtroom, I was preparing to call someone whose badge didn't care about his clipboard, his rules, or his fabricated authority. Someone who wasn't just an acquaintance, but a man who owed me a favor. A man who'd rebuilt the carb on my old Sportster on the tailgate of his cruiser during lunch break. A man who had zero tolerance for bullies with paperwork. Tomorrow, the HOA wasn't just going to have a hearing. They were going to have a reckoning. By noon the next day, the entire neighborhood felt like it had been rewound and replayed in a louder, more chaotic version of itself. Sunlight glinting off windshields and garage doors, as if the whole block had front row seats to a disaster they couldn't stop watching. And even though I'd spent the morning tightening bolts on the lift table and organizing the sockets on my pegboard like everything was normal, the tension in the street had the same hum as an overloaded power line. The kind that vibrated in the air just before it snapped. I had just finished drilling anchors into the concrete, perfect placement, perfectly legal, when I heard the familiar throat-clearing sound of trouble arriving. The HOA president, but not alone this time. No, today he'd reached his final form. Behind him marched 6 men wearing reflective vests with hastily printed HOA enforcement team stickers slapped crookedly across the chest, and one of them was dragging a rolling plastic bin labeled emergency response kit in permanent marker. Another carried a fire extinguisher. Another was filming. Another had what looked like a laser level held like a radar gun. Behind them came two board members, red-faced and exhausted, followed by a neighbor I'd never even seen before wearing a polo shirt tucked into jeans so tightly they squeaked when he walked. And at the center of all of it, the HOA president strode toward my open garage with the kind of theatrical fury that would have made more sense in a courtroom drama than a suburban driveway. The hearing has ended, he announced to absolutely no one who had attended it. And you have been found guilty of extreme noncompliance and rebellious structural activity. I wiped dust off my flannel and didn't bother looking up. Amazing, I said. Did the empty chair put up a good defense? He ignored me and barked at his squad, measure everything, document everything, leave nothing unassessed. Immediately every man scattered like startled chickens, one measuring the width of my driveway, another photographing my license plate, one kneeling to inspect a crack in the curb I'd never seen before, another filming the entire street as if gathering evidence of an alien landing. Greg wandered out with a sandwich in his hand. What's going on now? He asked. HOA meltdown, Mike answered, sipping from a thermos, picking up speed. The president stabbed a finger at the lift anchors I'd just drilled. This is the final straw. This is full structural conversion. It's 4 bolts, I said, 4 legal bolts with permits. The HOA does not recognize permits that threaten community order, he thundered. A volunteer holding the laser level announced, I think his garage is slanted. Then the laser rolled off his hand and hit the pavement. The president snarled, pick it up, we need accurate readings. It's broken, the volunteer whispered. Use it anyway, the president barked. Another volunteer held up a clipboard. Sir, what am I supposed to record? None of these fields make sense. Check all of them, he snapped. This is a Category 3 garage emergency. Category 3, Mike asked. Since when? Since just now, the president declared. He rounded on me again. Due to your refusal to attend the hearing, a grievous offense, the HOA hereby orders an immediate shutdown of this garage. Try it, I said, go on. Shut it down, his nostrils flared. We have authority. You don't, I replied, but I'm sure you'll try anyway. He lifted a neon orange paper from his clipboard, half-wrinkled, words written in aggressive marker strokes. This is an official HOA cease order, effective immediately, all work must stop. No, I said, you don't get to tell me how to use my property. The HOA squad gasped as if they'd witnessed a murder. The president puffed up like a blowfish. Then we moved to penalties. Which are, I asked. Severe, he declared, but didn't specify. I shrugged. You can't find me for legal renovations, Mark. His jaw clenched so hard the sound was nearly audible. Do not address me by first name during an enforcement operation. All right, I said. Enforcement officer Mark it is. Greg choked on his sandwich, laughing. The president shook with barely contained rage. Attention team, prepare the barrier. Immediately 2 volunteers rolled out caution tape and attempted to string it across my driveway, but one end got tangled, the tape snapped, and the remaining spool unraveled downhill in a long yellow ribbon that wrapped around a mailbox. The president pointed at them furiously. Fix it, then he spun back toward me. If you attempt to enter this garage, you will be subject to escalated sanctions. What sanctions? I asked. The most severe kind, he hissed. The HOA will move to full property control if necessary. Mike blinked. Full property control, dude, that's not real. You can't just take a man's house. We can, the president declared, and we will. You absolutely cannot, I said. You couldn't even take Greg's lawn gnome last month. Greg nodded. It's still there, by the way. The president snapped, quiet spectators. Then he turned back to me and delivered the line he thought would destroy me. If you do not comply, we will contact county authorities. I raised an eyebrow. Please do. We will, he repeated. Immediately? Great, I said, because I already did. Silence swept across the driveway like a sudden wind. The president's eyes widened. You did what? Called the sheriff, I said casually. Told him what was happening. The president laughed, a short, wild, unhinged burst. The sheriff does not care about HOA matters, Mike elbowed Greg. This part's going to be good. I kept my expression flat. He does when someone impersonates enforcement authority. The president froze. I never impersonated anyone, I gestured to his squad. Reflective vests labeled HOA enforcement, fake crime scene tape, a cease-use order pretending to override city permits. It is all within HOA rights, he shouted, voice cracking under the strain. No laws were broken, I nodded slowly. Sheriff will decide. One of the volunteers whispered nervously to another, can we be arrested for this? The president spun toward him. No one is being arrested, but his voice wavered. Something deep inside him, some instinct he'd buried under paperwork and self-appointed authority, knew this was spiraling out of his control. You're bluffing, he said, but the tremor in his throat betrayed him. I pulled out my phone and held it up. He's on his way. And at that moment, the entire street shifted. The volunteers exchanged panicked glances. The board members stepped back. Even the neighbor with the tucked-in polo shirt quietly relocated behind a car. Only the president refused to move. The HOA, he announced, does not fear law enforcement. But his hands were shaking. Sure, I said, tell him that when he gets here. As if on cue, a familiar county cruiser turned onto the street, sun flashing across the hood, engine humming low and steady. The president gasped, and for the first time since this whole mess began, his voice failed him completely. The crisis had arrived, and so had the man who could end it. When the sheriff's cruiser rolled to a slow stop in front of my driveway, sunlight gleaming across the windshield and the polished county emblem flashing like a warning flare, the entire neighborhood seemed to inhale at once, and I could almost feel the tension knotting the air as Sheriff Dalton, broad-shouldered, steady, and built like a man who'd never once lost an argument he intended to win, stepped out with the familiar calm swagger I'd watched him use 100 times back when we rode together on the weekends. He adjusted his duty belt, took off his sunglasses, and gave me a small nod that said, "I'm here. Let's handle this," before turning his eyes toward the chaotic mass of HOA volunteers in crooked vests, tangled tape, mismatched clipboards, and one guy holding a laser level as if bracing for impact. The HOA president puffed himself up like he was about to address Congress, marched forward, and announced in a trembling voice far more confident than he felt, "Deputy, we have this under control. This is a private matter of HOA governance." Dalton didn't even blink. "Sheriff," he corrected, voice calm but firm, "and nothing about this looks under control." The president sputtered. "We are conducting an official enforcement operation." Dalton looked him up and down, took in the fake vests, the tape, the panicking volunteers, the neon orange CSUS order stuck crookedly on my mailbox. "Son," Dalton said, "you're about 3 clipboard strokes away from impersonating law enforcement." The president froze, his mouth half open. Behind him, one volunteer whispered, "I told you this was a bad idea," and another slowly removed his vest as if doing so might make him invisible. Dalton stepped past them and into my garage, nodding at the lift anchors, the tools, the permits neatly framed on the wall. "All this yours?" he asked. "Yep," I said. "All permitted, all legal." Dalton nodded. "Good work, clean setup, nothing dangerous, nothing illegal." Then he turned on the HOA president with a tone that could have cut rebar. "So tell me, why exactly are you trying to shut down a lawful renovation?" The president shuffled his papers like a gambler searching for a winning hand. He is converting his garage into a commercial facility." "You see any commercial licenses?" Dalton asked. "Employees, cash register, open sign, parking lot?" The president shook his head violently. "No, but his intent is maliciously non-compliant." Dalton stared at him for a long, silent moment. "Intent," he repeated slowly, "is not something you get to invent." The board members exchanged looks of deep embarrassment. Volunteers stepped farther away. Even the polo shirt neighbor retreated behind a SUV, but the president wasn't done burying himself. "Sheriff," he said, voice straining, "the HOA has full authority to override city permits." Dalton lifted one eyebrow. "No, you don't. You can't override state, city, or county regulations. You enforce paint colors, lawn height, and trash schedules, that's it." The president's face went slack. But the rules say." "Show me the rule," Dalton said. "Go ahead. Show me the rule where you get police powers." The president frantically flipped through his papers until a sheet ripped out, fluttered away on the breeze, and slid under my truck. There is no need to show you anything. We are the HOA," Dalton stepped forward slowly. "And I am the sheriff, which means when you start handing out orders pretending you can shut down a legally permitted workspace, I get involved." He paused, eyes narrowing. "When you start assembling squads dressed like enforcement officers," he looked dead at the volunteers. "That's a problem." One volunteer whimpered softly. Another removed his vest and folded it like a surrender flag. The president took a shaky breath. "You do not understand our structure. The HOA has ranks." Dalton smirked. "What rank are you, General Clipboard?" Greg burst out laughing, nearly dropping the wrench he'd been twirling. Mike leaned on his fender, wiping a tear from his eye. The president turned 6 shades of panic. "This is serious. We are within our rights to." "No," Dalton said. "You are." Then Dallon reached into his cruiser and pulled out a small, weathered binder, one I recognized immediately, the County Property Rights Guide. The president flinched when Dalton opened it. "Let's read together," Dalton said. County Ordinance 14A, homeowners may renovate interior structures with valid city permits and no private governing body may override legal authorization. He snapped the binder shut. "That means this man," he pointed at me, "is completely within his rights, and you," he pointed at the president, "are way out of line." The president stuttered. But the hearing, the HOA hearing found him guilty." Dalton's eyebrow rose again. "You held a hearing without him?" "Yes." The president declared triumphantly, thinking this somehow helped. "And we unanimously found him in violation." Dalton laughed once, sharp and amused. "You held a pretend court in a room with no authority and declared yourselves judges." The president clenched his fists. "It was an official process." "Was it recorded?" Mike called. "With his phone," a volunteer muttered. "His personal phone." Dalton turned toward them. "That's not a hearing, that's you yelling at a chair." Greg nodded. "Was a nice chair, though." Dalton stepped back toward the president. "Now listen carefully. If you issue another CSUS order, if you attempt another forced shutdown, if you continue impersonating enforcement authority, or if you harass this man again, you will face real legal consequences." The president's clipboard slipped in his grip. "See consequences?" "Yep," Dalton said. "Charges if necessary." The volunteers collectively sucked in a breath. One quietly walked away. The president's voice cracked. You can't threaten me. The HOA has power." Dalton tilted his head. "Sure, between potlucks, but the moment you start overriding public authority, you cross into my territory." Then Dalton leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to a level only command officers and guilty men ever heard. And you do not want to be in my territory. The president swayed on his feet. There are rules, he whispered. You broke half of them, Dalton said, and invented the other half. Finally, the president broke, voice shaking, breathing fast. This will not end here. Oh, it ends, Dalton said, right now. He handed the president a formal notice. This is a county directive stating you are to cease all enforcement attempts on this property until an administrative review determines whether your HOA has exceeded its authority. Administrative review, the president repeated weakly. You can't review us. I can, Dalton said, and I will. The president looked like someone had unplugged his spine. The volunteers retreated, the board members stared at the pavement, and the whole street seemed to vibrate with a mix of shock, satisfaction, and relief as Dalton turned back to me. You good? He asked. Yeah, I said, thanks to you. Dalton gave me a small nod. Finish your garage, and if they come back, call me. Then he looked over his shoulder at the HOA president. I'll be in touch. And as the sheriff walked back to his cruiser, sunlight glinting off the chrome, the truth settled over the whole block. The HOA hadn't just lost control. They were about to be put on trial. When the sheriff's cruiser pulled away and the sound of its engine faded into the warm afternoon air, the HOA president looked like a man standing in the middle of a battlefield he thought he commanded but suddenly realized he'd never had any soldiers. And as neighbors emerged from garages and porches, men with coffee mugs, men wiping hands on rags, men who'd spent years putting up with his clipboard crusades, a strange, electric shift passed through the neighborhood. The kind you feel right before order is restored and everyone knows exactly who caused the chaos in the first place. I gathered my tools, adjusted the lift table, and tried to get back to work, but the president wasn't done unraveling. No, the defeat instead made him desperate. He stomped back up my driveway, trembling with fury, and shouted, "This is not over. The HOA will not bow to intimidation." But his voice cracked halfway, betraying the fear the sheriff had left in him. Sure, I said, tightening a bolt on the lift. Keep going, you're doing great. He sputtered, pointing in every direction except the right one. The administrative review will mean nothing. I will prove this HOA has full authority. Mike leaned on the fence. Over what? My recycling bin? Greg joined him. Maybe the squirrels. Two more board members approached hesitantly, both looking like men about to resign from unpaid positions they never wanted. The older one, Harold, cleared his throat. Mark, we need to talk. Not now, the president snapped. I have TO defend the HOA from a coordinated assault. That assault was you getting corrected by the sheriff, Harold said quietly, and he wasn't wrong. The president's face contorted. He understand, none of you understand. We understand perfectly, Harold replied. You told us you had authority you never had, you rewrote rules without approval, you conducted enforcement actions without board consent. And now you've triggered a county investigation. The other board member stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck. We got a call from the sheriff's office 10 minutes ago. They want copies of all records from the past 6 months, all incidents, all fines, all enforcement operations. And apparently there are a lot. The president blinked rapidly. That is normal, we are very active. Too active, Harold said, way too active. The president took a step back, suddenly unsteady. You are betraying me. You betrayed the HOA, Harold replied. You put us all at risk. More neighbors gathered now, Dan from the cul-de-sac, Robbie from the corner house, even old Mr. Bennett, who rarely came outside except to check his sprinklers. They formed a quiet semicircle, arms crossed, all of them watching the man who claimed to represent them but had never bothered to listen to any of them. I stepped out of the garage, brushing dust from my flannel. Mark, I said, keeping my tone even, go home, stop digging the hole deeper. You will not speak to me like that, he yelled, but the force behind his voice was gone. I am still HOA president. Not for long, Harold said, holding up a folded document. This is a board motion for emergency leadership review, signed by 3 of 5 members, effective immediately. The president's jaw dropped. You can't remove me. Yes, Harold said, we can and we are. No. The president lunged for the paper, but Harold stepped back. Let me finish, Harold said calmly. You are suspended pending county review. You are barred from conducting any enforcement activity. You must surrender all HOA materials, keys, documents, everything. The president shook violently. This is a coup. You are corrupting the HOA. We're saving it, Harold said. From you. The president's knees wobbled as he looked around and found no allies. His volunteers had vanished. Ord had turned. His power had evaporated. He grabbed his clipboard like a life preserver, hugging it to his chest as if it could protect him from reality. This is not fair, he whispered. I built this association. You abused it, Harold said, and the county will sort out the rest. The president let out a fractured sound, half grunt, half sob, then turned and marched down the driveway in jerky, stumbling movements, shouting over his shoulder, this community will regret this. You have no idea what you have done. But it sounded less like a threat and more like a man trying to convince himself he still mattered. When he reached the sidewalk, he tripped over the loose spool of caution tape, flailed wildly, and landed flat on his back. Nobody rushed to help him, not out of cruelty, out of exhaustion. Eventually, he climbed to his feet, dignity long gone, and shuffled down the street, clutching the clipboard he no longer had authority to use. The crowd slowly dissolved, neighbors heading home, conversations buzzing with relief. Mike wandered into my driveway. Well, he said, sipping what remained of his coffee. That was satisfying. Greg nodded. Better than cable. The two board members lingered. Harold approached me with a tired but genuine expression. Listen, he said, I know this can't undo what he put you through, but thank you for standing your ground. You kept this from getting worse. Just want to work on my bikes, I said. Not wage war, Harold sighed. The sheriff's review will likely remove him permanently. We'll elect a new president, someone reasonable this time. Good idea, Mike said. Maybe someone who doesn't scream before breakfast. Or write rules at 3 a.m., Greg added. Harold gave a rueful nod. We'll do better. And for the first time since moving in, I believed him. The sun dipped slightly, warming the driveway, lighting up the chrome on my motorcycle parts, reflecting off the lift table now perfectly anchored in place. I stepped into the garage, flipped on the new LED lights, and the whole space lit up in crisp, bright white, clean, organized, and mine. Behind me, the neighborhood returned to its normal sounds. Tools clinking, a lawnmower humming somewhere down the street, the faint rumble of Mike testing a carb adjustment. For the first time in days, everything felt right again. Then my phone buzzed, a text from Sheriff Dalton. Investigation launched. HOA president won't bother you again. Garage looks great. Ride soon. I smiled, grabbed a wrench, and tightened the last bolt on the lift. The garage echoed with the satisfying metallic click of a job finally able to continue without interference. Justice served, order restored, sun shining, tools ready, bikes waiting. And the HOA finally back in its rightful place, far away from my garage.